Welcome to Underdubs, a podcast about 70s progressive rock and more. This podcast is a conversational music variety show with a focus on the classic progressive rock artists of the 1970s and how their music has shaped culture, technology, and the music of today. We'll, of course, cover the classic prog bands like Yes and Genesis, but also other forms like the Canterbury scene, neo-prog, proto-prog, and fusion, and all points in between. Your hosts, Brian Donahue and Pat Strawser, are two of the founding members of the instrumental progressive rock fusion band Volare, based in Athens, Georgia, from the mid-1990s. In this episode, we talk about the 5 albums that got us into progressive rock. We go on to talk about our favorite solo sections featured in progressive rock songs. Be sure to check out the links that we provide in the notes for playlists and other content that we discuss here. We hope you enjoy the show. If you could pick 5 prog rock albums that you would say got you into the scene, what would they be?
Well, classic Yes, the compilation on cassette, as we already mentioned, that's one. But I bet I could name 5 more. Foxtrot by Genesis on used LP purchased in downtown Athens for, what, $2 or $3, you know?
Right.
And I had a crappy turntable. I was probably 15, and I slowly got into side 1. Like I was playing it, the first song, oh man, that's weird. Oh, I'll give it another try. And then the next time I spin the record, I get in past side 1 into side 2 or into song number 2. I'm like, yeah, I don't know, but I kind of like that first song though. And then the third time you play it, you get a little further, like, yeah, it's starting to make sense. Side 2, however, was harder for me to crack. It really took me a while. But I remember I had taped that record, side A and B, onto a cassette and taken it with me on family vacation that summer. And then another thing I got from a friend, King Crimson, A Young Person's Guide to King Crimson, which is a good compilation and has at least one alternate track on it. It's a different version of I Talk to the Wind. I don't really love the kind of hippy-dippy ballads on the first King Crimson record, but I really liked the version that's on that compilation, which is a female singer. I think it's Judy Dybel singing it. And it's a much more concise little pop tune. But it was a good compilation, and the cool thing about it is, even though it was a tiny cassette, it came with the 12 by 12 booklet that would have accompanied the LP version.
Okay.
So I had the tiny cassette and this big book, which was full of photos and Robert Fripp's journal from that time period, which is pretty cool.
I have a question about that record because I just became aware of it, I think, yesterday, because that was released in the 70s, like 76, is that right?
I think so, yeah.
And so it covers Court Lizard Poseidon period and some of the John Wetton period, is that right?
Yeah, I think all of that. I think Red is on there.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I think it was put together after they broke up in, 74?
Right, okay.
I don't know if it was to fulfill a contractual obligation or what, but that would be my guess.
Right.
Around that time, I thought 8-track tapes were cool, and I found an old 8-track player. And it was funny. This is a funny little hobby that I had as a 15 or 16-year-old. Go into people's houses and say, hey, you still listen to those? Oh, I'll take them. I had 2 garbage bags full in my living room at home, full of 8-track tapes. I mean, wow. hundreds and hundreds. And most of them were crap, absolute crap. You know, among all that crap, I had Trilogy by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and I used to play it in the 8-track deck, listen on headphones before going out the door to catch the school bus in 8th grade. I'd have breakfast, I'd put the headphones on, I'd listen to either Trilogy by ELP or Hunky Dory by David Bowie. Ooh. That's still my favorite Bowie record because I had that on 8-track as well. Pat and I both grew up near or in Athens, Georgia, big college town, big music town. So good opportunities for used records. And sure enough, there was a Gentle Giant LP at one of the used stores, but it was a double. You know, I don't know if I could afford it. It was probably like $5, but somehow I bought it. brought it home, played it on the crappy turntable. And it was another one that really took me forever. For one, because that live album, Playing the Fool, the double album,
right. Yeah.
is from 76 and doesn't have the greatest sound. So I didn't fall in love with it because the way it sounded. And some of the songs took me a long time to get into, but then finally one of them clicked with me. And I think that's all you need is like the gateway drug.
Yeah, totally.
So the song was On Reflection. And I really liked it because it has this kind of classical introduction with cellos and violins and vibraphone and all the stuff. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. That's very melodic. And I enjoyed the melody really brought me in. And then they go into this crazy a cappella section and then they rock like a rock band. I'm like, all right, I'm in. This is good. It was only later when I got the studio version that I realized how Gentle Giant was famous for rearranging their songs, which are already super intricate, rearranging them for stage performance. So the version of that song that I got used to is nothing at all like what's on the studio version, which is cool. That's pretty neat.
Right.
And if I could pick another one, I would say Genesis Live, the live record from 73. It was the first prog rock title that I ever bought on CD. So it was an investment. It's me saying, all right, I'm comfortable with this. I'm paying $17 for this privilege or whatever it was. Just blew me away. And I still love it. It's still my very favorite Genesis product of any of their records. But I was so new to them at the time. I remember seeing on the back, I think it said Philip Collins on drums. And I was like, oh man, I can't believe that can't be the Sussudio guy, can it? Because my version of Foxtrot that I had was like the cheap, second edition or whatever, the reprint that didn't have any of the credits. So I didn't know who played on it. It took me a while to warm up to that. But I love the record though, and I still do, and soon learned to love Phil, and I still do.
That's a great story, man. I like that. I can remember for a while being, why do I want to get into Genesis, man? The Sussudio guy, yeah. Who wants to listen to that, right? And then you hear, I think Peter Gabriel used to be in that band a long time ago.
So how about you? What got you into this music?
Well, I'm going to see if I can go chronologically here. It was junior year going into senior year. Rush was my first kind of prog rock band. I was getting into classic rock, so I'd gotten the first Rush album on CD, and I loved it. I thought it was just smoking.
That's the self-titled one?
Yeah. If you like classic rock, man, it's a great record. I had read about progressive rock. I think later that year I'd gotten a hold of 90125, and on the liner notes in the back it said Britain's premier 70s progressive rock band, and I'm like, okay, so I'm starting to hear this word progressive rock. I wonder what that means. And again, I'd already heard like Led Zeppelin. I was getting into Led Zeppelin. In fact, this is 1991, so I remember I had a pretty distinct memory of going into Turtles.
I remember Turtles
records and tapes, and buying Nirvana's Nevermind. Came out in the fall of 1991. It had Smells Like Teen Spirit and all the rest of it on it. And I loved that song, and I loved the first few tracks off of that record. Right around the same time, I picked up Zeppelin 2 and Zeppelin 4 from the bargain bin on cassette from Turtles. And I don't think I didn't know it at the time, but I kind of made this, I gravitated towards the 70s stuff more so than the 90s stuff. But the one that got me, the one that was sort of like, oh wait, this is something different. I'm going to just go with Exit Stage Left, because that one was, it kind of chronicles the late 70s period. So the Xanadu and some of that stuff, the Trees, La Via Strangiato, all these kind of like prog rock kind of classics. And I was like, oh man, this is it. I even got, I think my parents got me a book of sheet music, a couple of songs from each record up to Moving Pictures. So they had the sheet music for Xanadu and Red Barchetta, all that stuff. And I was like, oh, this is cool. So I could play it on the piano. I'd been taking piano lessons. So there was a connection point there where it's like, oh, I'm going to learn to play the music that I'm listening to too. I'd done a little bit of that, but not like that. That following summer was when I got the classic Yes album. At that point, I had actually heard, I think I had Big Generator and 90125 and Anderson, Bruford, Wakeman, and Howe somehow ended up in the first one that I listened to, though, because this is when they were touring for the Union record. Union was the first Yes album I actually owned.
Really?
And I was like, is this progressive rock? I don't know. Which it's just hilarious that that's the starting point for me. Because then it was when I got classic Yes, I'm like, oh, okay, this makes sense. And then, then I went from there. And so, yeah, Exit Stage Left, classic Yes. And then right around that same period, this would have been the summer of like 1992 for me. So I'm like a junior in high school. Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here. There was something about that record that just kind of turned my head on towards in that direction. I think I had Delicate Sound of Thunder, the live record from 88, somewhere in there. Same time, I think my parents got me the Pink Floyd and the best of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Which is a weird compilation. It's a weird. It's a little weird.
I had an ELP cassette. Did it have like a Japanese painting on the front? Is that the one?
It did, yeah. Yeah, it sure did.
I think I know. And it's got Peter Gunn on it.
It's got Peter Gunn. It's got Hoedown. It's got
Tiger in a Spotlight.
Tiger in a Spotlight. It has Trilogy, the title track, Trilogy. It has Jerusalem and Still You Turn Me On, Lucky Man, of course. And then the radio edit of Carnival 9. Part, First Impression Part 2 or whatever it is. Like the stuff that you would hear on classic rock radio. And I remember this happening right around that time before I got that record, listening to, I think it was either in Atlanta, the radio stations, the classic rock radio stations were Z93 and 96 Rock. And one of them would play Carnival 9. I'm like, what in the world is this? This is cool. And then as I move into my senior year, I had a girlfriend who was, I know, it's, as we're talking about progressive rock, it's not something that you don't hear progressive rock. And I have a girlfriend usually in the same sentence. She was English. She was British. And her dad, I pilfered the first 2 Jethro Tull records off of him, Close to the Edge and Court of the Crimson King. But Court of the Crimson King was the one I was going to put on my list because that was my first introduction to Crimson. So those are my picks.
It's pretty solid classics there.
Yeah, I think so. It's a good foundation to start from. And in fairly short order, I'd gotten, I think the Yes box set was released right around that time.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And
Yes Years.
Yes Years, yeah, from 1992.
Mm-hmm.
And so that really, my head kind of exploded at that point. Well, actually, the Yes Years, that's a pretty important product because it had the Pete Frame progressive rock family tree graphic. And that's where you get introduced to everything else.
That's true. I forgot about that.
And that was, that was sort of like, that was sort of like my Bible in a way. It's like, oh, have I heard Bruford yet? I need to check that out. And if you like Bruford, you might like this band. And you just start trucking through all the titles, all the artists, all the guys that played. The 1,700 Rick Wakeman solo albums.
It should be said, these were really big albums. I mean, these bands were big bands in the U.S. and I guess in the U.K. too. But on the smaller side would be Gentle Giant and Genesis in their early days. But if we're talking about Yes and ELP and Jethro Tull and Pink Floyd, I mean, these were major stadium artists. stadium rockers of, but certainly by the mid 70s, you know.
Yeah.
Yes, playing at RFK Stadium in 1976. And what were they playing? They were playing Relayer. It's bananas, you know.
Right.
I'm gonna, if I try to quote how many people were there, but it's Googleable. It's a well-known statistic. I'm gonna get the number wrong, but it's a lot of people.
Yeah.
This music was big. So when people talk about, oh, the big 5 or the big 6 bands, these are kind of who we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only, like you said, with a little research or a little luck, or somebody's dad or somebody's older brother, in my case, loaning you some records or showing you a tape or whatever, or saying something.
Yeah.
That in the pre-Wikipedia days that you could find out about these other subgenres of the prog rock family tree, you know, like Canterbury or whatever else. The big 6 or the big 5 or kind of like the anchor point for us both. And, you know, not everybody branches out from there. Some people are like, okay, that's enough. I've seen Yes
Right.
play at RFK Stadium, and they just didn't stop. And then I went home, and that was good. And then some people hear it, and then they love what they hear, and they gradually, like you're describing, follow these threads
Yeah.
to all these other little subgenres and the bands that didn't make it, or the bands that kind of made it.
Right.
And there's a lot of those bubbling under that sustained a career. Gentle Giant is one. You know, had kind of a high profile in the mid 70s in America, but they sustained themselves for a decade, but they don't have a lot of name recognition with the public these days.
Right. So I have a bonus round question for you.
Hit me.
Since we're talking about why do we like it and what were the entry points, since we're both musicians too, in what way did your introduction to progressive rock affect the way you enjoyed playing, or the way you played at all? What was that like for you?
It hit me pretty hard and instantaneously on the drums, which was my instrument, at age 15. And I think I was already into Genesis when I got my drums. So it was very natural for me to want to emulate that to an extent. You said something earlier too about you had sheet music for some of the Rush stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true that not every young music student makes the leap. I mean, think about the classical musicians that we've known who are great players, but don't necessarily make the leap between the thing I'm allowed to play that's on the printed page on my instrument and the thing I want to play, or the thing that sounds like what I'm playing on my stereo at home.
Mm-hmm.
For me, there was absolutely no blurry line even. I mean, it was just from the minute I had a drum set and from the minute I had music I liked, I'm like, well, clearly it's up to me to play this instrument in a style of what I want to hear, right? I did not have drum lessons. I didn't take music lessons at all. Couldn't read music. Couldn't do anything. All I wanted to do was just play music that I liked. And I think for a lot of people, that means strapping on the headphones and playing on top of their favorite artists, right? Learning to play drums. I know so many people that could say, oh, I learned drums by listening to 2112 on my headphones and playing along.
Right.
I think I tried that with various stuff. I didn't like it. Either I didn't like it or I wasn't good at it.
Right.
So instantly what it looked like for me is I was informed by what I was listening to, and I never, ever, ever tried to mimic it. Like I didn't try to play Genesis songs. I didn't sit there. And part of that is my temperament. I know that I would have gotten frustrated and punched a hole in the drums, because if you're a 15-year-old kid, absolutely unschooled, you're not going to play Watcher of the Skies correctly.
Right.
You can allow it to inform you, allow it to give you some ideas and screw around on the drum set for a while. And then you get your own thing going and go with that.
Right.
So I was like, I'm going to go with this. This is what I got. And it got a little better. It was not great by any means, but got a little better and a little more confident. I think it wasn't until you and I were playing that that summer when it was just you and me, when our guitar player Steve had to go away for work or school or whatever. We're like, well, now what do we do? The band's not here. What do we do? And we were just messing around, and we learned like Cinema Show and some other the Genesis song Cinema Show and maybe some ELP or something, and took a stab. I had never tried to apply myself to play this music that I really, really loved. To me, it was the job of music to just like inspire me enough to sit down in front of the drums, and something's going to happen.
Right.
That's what happened.
That's good. that's a good story, man. I like it, because I think in a way, I have a
little person.
I have a visitor. Hey, come here. You want to say hi? So my experience was a little different because, but not entirely different. I found myself because I had I had taken piano lessons for many years. I'd gotten a hold of the sheet music for the Rush stuff, and I thought, oh man, this is pretty cool stuff to play. And so, and before that, I hadn't really had the experience of. I know this is great.
I'm enjoying it.
Before that, like when I was maybe 14, 15, I had the scope of my experience with playing music that I liked. There was like, what in the piano lesson do I like to play? And it's like, not very much of it. But then I've got like a book of like great piano classics, and it's all like Terms of Endearment and St. Elmo's Fire and Pink Panther and all this kind of, like light, easy listening, dinner jazz type stuff. The music that I liked, so to speak, was, songs I didn't really, I wasn't learning like REM songs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then it was the Rush book was really sort of the point where it all kind of came together. My senior year of high school, I met my friend Brandon, who we've probably mentioned here before. He was a drummer and he loved Rush, and we got together and we started jamming. And his buddy Ryan, that was into Metallica and stuff like that, but we were big Rush fans, and so that's sort of where it kind of took off for me. Then later, Brandon wanted to put together a band, and he got these hotshot guys. I may have mentioned it before too, that they were all like, they could play all of this music already. I was like, it blew me away because I was just learning about it. But here they were, these guys are coming in. Here's Heart of the Sunrise. They could sing it, they could play all of it. And I was just like, I just got here and I could play classical music very poorly, and I could play some of these pop songs but very poorly, but I was like, I want to. And again, like kind of like for you, it wasn't until we met. The short story is I wasn't cool enough to hang with the band that they were putting together because I wasn't good enough. So I thought, well, I'll just start my own band. That's when I met you guys, and the rest kind of took off from there, because I was sort of learning how to play while I was learning all the music.
It was kind of the same thing, because let's say I was good enough or natural enough at my instrument to instantly play along with the songs that I loved, I never would have gotten anything accomplished, like I never would have left my bedroom,
Right. Yeah. The thing is that I tried to learn how to play some of the ELP stuff. I just wasn't very good at it. I mean, even when we had gotten together and we had learned a few things, the stuff that worked best was when we were making up our own thing. And it really definitely. So I'm like you, I got okay with playing some of it. I think I learned Take a Pebble and maybe the piano intro to Trilogy and some stuff like that. But I was no piano virtuoso by any measure. I was sort of like, I just wanted to get invited to the party, or throw my own party, and invite other people to that and see what we could do.
That's the route I took.
Yeah, the magic really started to happen when we got together and we started writing our own stuff. It was that's what made it all hum for me.
Yeah.
Well, and he has left the building. I see. I better go.
In true Keith Emerson style, he's got the synthesizer babbling away in the background.
Right. Now, what about solos? What are your favorite solos? Keyboard, guitar, bass, for that matter, on a progressive rock song?
That's a good question. I can think of some right away. And I guess some people would say, well, these things you're talking about are features and not solos. So to me, when we were talking about a solo within a progressive rock song, I'm talking about a feature of an instrumentalist. I know it's probably not always improvised. Think of Steve Hackett in Firth of Fifth, the famous guitar part. It's not even his melody. It's the main melody of the song. You can count that if you want, is what I'm saying.
Right. Sure.
I don't need to get too technical that, well, it's got to be an improvisation. So not a solo in a jazz context.
Right. Gotcha.
But it could be. And so some of these certainly have elements of improvisation in them. And the ones that I can think of, keyboard-wise, on the organ especially, Carrie Minier of Gentle Giant, the song Playing the Game, which is on the Power and the Glory album, is one of the great organ solos in Prog. Tells a little story, gets in, tells us a little story, does his little dance, and gets out. Doesn't overstay its welcome. It's a great track and an amazing solo. He's such a great player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he gets a real gnarly sound on his Hammond on that record, on that song. It seems like I had read somewhere that he did a lot of work on his amplification system there.
I remember reading an interview when it was time to record. He would turn the organ on and leave a heavy book on the low keys so that the valves would just play continuously for an hour or two and get really loose and warmed up. And they'd go out to lunch or something. He'd come back, take the book off, and then it was time to do the recording.
Oh, that's interesting. I may have to test that out. I have to try that out.
I'm sure your family would appreciate it.
Well, I'll make sure they're not here.
Speaking of organ solos, I can think of some more pretty obvious ones that spring to mind immediately as things that I absolutely treasure. I think they're masterpieces, little mini masterpieces within songs, and they're both by Rick Wakeman, and they're both in Yes.
Oh, okay.
Roundabout and Close to the Edge. Both have just shredding on the Hammond, just fantastic.
Yeah, Close to the Edge in particular. I feel like both of those songs also, they bookend two aesthetics that I really like about Yes. It wasn't obvious to me until I started playing a lot more different types of music. But like the soul gospel influence on Roundabout, if you've ever played at a black church, the da 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 in and around the lake, that's a groovy little passage, and the solo is very much of that kind of aesthetic. It's a solo that's not terribly complicated, but any time that I find myself, let's say I have the Hammond in my studio cranked up and I play Roundabout, well, I just might try to play along, and I'm never going to be able to quite capture it because I don't quite get it. It just screams. I'm with you on that. But on the other side of that, like, so you've got the gospel soul aesthetic over here on that tune, and then you've got a more kind of classical, more modern approach on Close to the Edge, which that is a written solo. That's a part. Like, hey guys, we're gonna go cover Close to the Edge and play it at the pub. Well, transcribe the solo. Don't freestyle that thing, man, because that's all the dorks that come out that know the song will call you out on it.
How about you? You have any particular favorites that jump out?
Those two are up there. I would say that, they almost don't require, like, those are understood to be.
They're canon.
They're canon, right? Yeah. I had Firth of Fifth on my list, the guitar feature. A lot of Hackett's stuff, there's something about the way he plays Like I was thinking about Spectral Mornings from his solo record, and I know that's not really it's the melody that he's playing on the guitar. I don't know that there's really an improvised solo on that piece, but whenever I hear his tone and I hear him playing melodies or something like that, I feel like I could put like a couple of other Hackett numbers on that list. The Prog guys, Genesis in particular, like those guys didn't really improvise those instrumental passages. Supper's Ready, organ solo, it's written. Cinema Show, the synth solo is written. You play it just like this. The same thing with that guitar feature. And it works, and I love it. There's like a deep emotion there to me about those parts. I really love them. Other standouts, of course, In the Cage, Cinema Show, I mentioned that one. Some other ones, though, that I really like would be Lyle May's piano solo on First Circle. Again, maybe not so proggy, maybe prog adjacent, more in the jazz territory, but they've got a good number of tunes that you could classify as prog or fusion anyway. And the piano solo on First Circle, it's just a very emotional, very intense, very cinematic kind of statement. And it's another one that anytime I hear it, you just get emboldened. You just kind of get excited about it. He has another piece called Close to Home, which is on one of his solo albums, one from '85, and it's not something that showed up on any of the Matheny Group records. It's sometimes in live shows it's referred to as Mars, and it's this very earnest, almost gospel inspired type of number that it could almost go on a Bruce Hornsby record or something like that. It's a very simple form, but the piano solos that he plays on that particular tune they just sort of capture me. A couple other ones that I really love. There is a Mini Moog solo on the National Health tune Elephants. I think that tune was recorded. I think it's live.
I think it's kind of that tinkly intro is what was live. Like kind of the improv bit that it fades into with.
Okay, maybe that's it.
I think you could even hear the new track, like the cymbals recorded in the studio, overlapping with the cymbals in the
interesting. Okay,
live tape. I'm pretty sure.
It's been a minute since I listened to it, but several minutes in, Alan Gowan comes in with this very smooth Mini Moog solo that I just adore it. It's just one of those that, and the Health stuff has so many moments like that, but that one for me is it's one of my favorite parts on the whole record. Then they reprise Tenements Roads, the last, few minutes of that track. Just a couple of other ones. I love the Mini Moog solo on Birds of Fire.
Oh yeah.
By Mahavishnu. And a funny thing about that is that solo, in kind of typical jazz form, Mahavishnu will do a thing where they state a melody and then the guitar player takes his solo, and then they state the melody and then the keyboard player, and everyone goes around the room. And I don't know how old I was until I realized that was not a guitar.
Yeah, I've read somewhere that there was, I don't know if it's on purpose, but what they noticed is that the violin, the guitar, and the Mini Moog were emulating each other so much. I guess because they spent so much time together and played together so much that you would be forgiven for hearing, Jan Hammer on the Mini Moog and thinking that it's not, what's his name, Jerry Goodman? Jerry Goodman,
right. That solo is just... I love it because I feel like I got tricked, but it's also a good example. I think it's one of the more early examples of the Mini Moog being used as a solo instrument.
And I don't think there's synth on Intermounting Flame.
There's not. Yeah, it's there's some Hammond organ and there's some Rhodes played through a ring modulator, which you get some kind of funky sounds. To bring it more modern, there is a current fusion group called Snarky Puppy, which I know a lot of our listeners will be familiar with. And there's a really well-known keyboard player by the name of Corey Henry that tours with them frequently. They have a rotating cast of characters that all tour with them. Another guy named Bill Lawrence, fantastic keyboard player. Corey Henry played this pretty well-known. They just blew up over a couple of songs, but this is one that's up there called Lingus, and he plays this synth solo that's just unbelievable. It's like, in fact, when I first heard this band probably 10 or 12 years ago, I was just like, this stuff is insane. How fusiony and how proggy it is. I'm like, how is this stuff popular? That doesn't seem right.
That is a good question. It'd be worth talking about on its own.
Yeah. So that's a fantastic group, and some of the synth work, some of the solo work on those records is amazing. One last one though that I'll mention is totally outside of the prog idiom, but I feel like I need to mention it just because it probably will tell to anyone that cares. It'll tell you a little bit about the things that I like about synth melodies, and that would be the synth solo in Valerie by Steve Winwood.
Do I know Valerie by Steve Winwood?
You've heard that song.
Oh, yeah. 80s song. Right?
Yeah.
So have that kind of harmonica flute kind of, I can hear it.
Yeah. And so he's just a master lyricist, not just like words, but just his melodies are so lyrical and singable. He's a huge influence on me as a songwriter, but also as a synth player, because the melodies, it's another one where if you listen to that solo, it's real bluesy. And some people would probably say that's like 80s schlock cheese stuff, but it's super melodic, and it's real tasteful to me.
It's adult contemporary.
It's very adult contemporary, right? Yeah, it's the kind of thing that, let's just say, I wouldn't mind if some prog soloists would take a few notes from.
Got it. Well, I would like to add to my list just a shout out to Steve Howe, who's probably my favorite guitar player, and in particular his solo on "Yours Is No Disgrace," which was on his first album with Yes. I listened to it a million times, and it still puts me in a good mood, because he's like switching between various models of guitar, kind of overlapping. In my mind, I picture him with like 3 guitars sitting there playing different ones. People weren't really doing that, at least to my knowledge. So I think his guitar playing, especially on the Yes album, is pretty mind expanding, I think. I mean, really.
Yeah. Speaking of Howe, I have one Howe moment. Well, I have many, but I would say the one that stands out to me the most, other than Yours Is No Disgrace, might be the guitar feature in Sound Chaser.
Yeah.
Because that's such a blistering song, and when he brings it down and
but I think he also, he'd already played lap steel guitar with Yes, but I think there's even pedal steel guitar at least on side 2 of Relayer. And I mean, he's just tearing it up on that entire record. I love Relayer.
Yeah.
Love everything about it.
Yeah, there's a lot to love. Thanks for joining us again on this episode of Underdubs. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram. See you next time.